Welcome everyone to Debate Me Brah, the show where we ask interlocutors to step into the ring and defend their point of view. On tonight's debate, we're asking the question, theocracy? Positive or negative? And we have both Claire Khaw and Mark Reid here to help us find an answer. So with that, it's time to debate me, brah. Woohoo! Hello there, misfits on the intertubes. If you're feeling fancy, don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe. And set that bell icon to all so you can see our premieres and join our live streams. Hi, interwebs.
Hey, guys.
This debate is also sponsored by our Patreons, our awesome Patreons, including Khaw, Champ, and Oz from the Atheist Round Table. Tangang Yo.
Thank you, Oz.
But also Ian Davenport.
Thanks, Ian.
And also, as we fight the YouTube censors, a grumpy. Thank you so much, Grumpy.
Grumpy.
Sending love, Grumpy. And 3 princesses in 1. Sending love to Diana Smith.
Diana.
Thank you, Diana, and across the pond. Now he's back. It's kind of like an Avengers movie. Pat. Woohoo! Sending love, Pat.
Welcome back.
And also Dale Pastel.
Good night, Dale.
Yes, have a great night. And it's Dave Gar. Sending love, Dave Gar. And also the lead hyena of the pack. Sending love to Scott Duke. And finally, last but not least, thank you, Regis.
Thank you.
Woohoo! Thank you. In fact, if you'd like to help us make more fun content, you can at patreon.com/Amy Newman, which helps us make even more fun content.
More fun.
More debates. More I was going to say, more global homo. I'm Amy Newman, and this is my co-host, James W., and these 2 schmucks will be tonight's moderators. Our job is making sure these 2 wonderful debaters don't talk over each other. Though we don't mind if things get a little bit spicy.
Little bit.
Little bit spicy. Speaking of spicy,
Extra spicy, Claire.
Tonight's debate topic is theocracy, with Claire taking the positive and Mark taking the negative. We also have a Q&A section at the end of the debate. So, if you have questions for either debater or both, feel free to tag either James or I at James W. or Amy Newman in chat with your questions. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to our first interlocker to introduce themselves and give their 10-minute opening statement. Claire, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Amy, for having me on your show. As you all know, I will be arguing for theocracy because I think that would be a way of stabilizing society and stopping incompetent and cowardly politicians for changing our laws for incompetent and corrupt reasons. I managed to get Stefan Molyneux, the libertarian and atheist, to agree with me that theocracy could actually give people more rights, because under a theocracy, the laws wouldn't change, because the presumption would be that God wouldn't make mistakes, and whatever laws he said we had to keep, that was it, and we can't change it. And that would give more stability than politicians changing the meanings of words, such as marriage and all kinds of other things, to suit their own corrupt ends. So that, I think, would be a good reason for theocracy if we want to have some kind of stability where we don't find laws changing. For example, the rules on lockdown, they seem to change every few hours, every week, every fortnight. We don't know what's allowed and what isn't anymore in the world. And I think a lot of people suffer from mental health issues because we don't know what the rules are anymore. There's a lot of doubt about whether lockdown is necessary, and and isn't a huge conspiracy from big pharma. And because we don't trust our politicians, we tend to believe, or quite a lot of us believe, these stories. And it is because of a lack of trust, and a lack of trust is because the laws keep changing. I know that the Aztecs were the most infamous example of a theocracy, but I think theocracy should be divided, because there are as many different theocracies as there are different gods, and the Aztecs were, I believe, illiterate, or they found no example of Aztec writing. So who was in control was the priesthood, and these were the terrible people who practiced human sacrifice, because apparently the sun would rise the next day if they didn't practice human sacrifice. And they did it so badly that when the Spanish finally invaded, they got rid of them and took all their gold. But that would be an ecclesiocracy, which is controlled by a group of people who are a law unto themselves, because they had no written scripture. But the theocracy I have in mind would be based on the laws of the Abrahamic God, and we all know that the Quran has been revealed. Well, it was revealed in the 7th century. Its wording is no longer in dispute by anyone. So it could be certainly argued that objective morality is in Scripture. Whether we approve of the scripture or not, we know that the laws of God are contained in that particular scripture, i.e. the Quran, and from that we can derive our rights, because we already know the wording and it hasn't changed, and therefore any rights that we find will be derived from that rule book that cannot be changed, and this will give us the stability that we need to bring about moral regeneration. The West, in my view, needs moral regeneration because it is in decline, and that's why it's worried about China and accusing Russia of meddling in its elections, when it seems more likely that it is meddling in its own elections because of the legal action of Trump saying the November election was stolen. And whether it is true or not, it creates a doubt in the minds of many people, and is a cause of instability, because 70 million Americans who think the election was stolen can cause doubt in many people's minds. So the problem, I think, is that people who do not accept the hypothetical supreme authority are actually not using a methodology that could help them solve their problem sooner rather than later. So if we assume that there is a supreme, hypothetical supreme authority, we will have a worldview that is, predicated on the existence of the Abrahamic God. But even if we don't believe it, it's still a system that allows us to solve problems, because if we accept the 7 Noahide laws, which actually I think are fair enough. So the 7 Noahide laws are laws forbidding murder, laws forbidding theft, laws forbidding sexual immorality, the prohibition against eating an animal while it's still alive, and the positive commandment to establish a court and legal system. The first 5, in my view, would be uncontroversial even for atheists. The last 2, which is the prohibition against idolatry and blasphemy, would be controversial for people who are atheists and agnostics and libertarians. But I think I can make a case for that. But we have to remind ourselves that the Quran actually doesn't prescribe a this life punishment for idolatry or blasphemy. In fact, it doesn't even mention blasphemy at all. So I use the 7 Noahide laws to rank the 4 Gentile religions, and I would make Islam the most Noahide religion because it conforms to all these 7 requirements, and for that reason, I think that should be the rational and moral choice, particularly if you think the rule of law is breaking down in the West, and we can see that through rising crime and increasing distrust of our government and fear for the future. And I think people need to feel good and safe, and one of the reasons for using God as a policeman in our head is to give us a conscience, so we feel bad when we've done bad things, and we naturally correct ourselves. And the best thing about using this system of the Noahide laws is to if we're suffering, we can attribute it to sin. I know this is not an idea popular with many people, but the thing is, I think all civilizations fall for the same reason, and it is caused by lowering standards of sexual morality, and this leads to all kinds of other unintended and unwelcome consequences that the next generations won't be able to correct because they won't feel responsible for the mistakes. So I think if we think, if we assume that God exists and created the universe and made laws for us to follow, which means we should expect punishment if we break the laws, and when we suffer, we can just go through the tick list of the 7 that I mentioned, and try and discover which one it is that we've broken most, and stop doing it, and maybe things will get better. And I think this kind of reasoning, this methodology of problem solving, would make us correct ourselves sooner rather than later. And that's all I have to say on the matter. Thank you very much.
All right, we'll turn it over to Mark for his 10-minute opening. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Claire. I would just grab my presentation. I'll just have to share my screen. 1 second.
We may have to approve it. But...
Okay. So I want to...
Here we go.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Amy, James, and Claire, and thank you all for joining me. It's wonderful to be here, and I've really looked forward to this particular debate. It was a bit all over the place, I do admit, and I didn't know whether maybe Claire was going for theocracy or not, but I'm glad that we're on it because that's what I actually prepared. Basically, we want to look at theocracy as a system of government. And first thing, of course, is what is theocracy? So I've got a few definitions here, and I do acknowledge that definitions are not always hard and fast. They can be a matter of usage, but these are the three ones that I think would represent it. So they've got a system of government where priests rule in the name of a god or a gods. I think the best one is actually the Britannica one, a theocracy, government by divine guidance, or where officials are regarded as divinely guided. So this is important for a theocracy because basically, unless the people actually believe that the theocracy is divinely guided, it doesn't work. So the only way it can work, if it does work at all, is if people actually believe that the people in charge, i.e. the priests or the clergy, are actually receiving divine guidance from a god or gods. Now, let's have a look at some modern theocratic nations so we know what we're talking about here. Most of them are Middle Eastern nations, from Yemen to Sudan to Afghanistan. Now, Vatican City is the only theocracy which I've sort of made an exception to. And the reason why is that it only has 800 people or so in Vatican City, and they're all either a member of the clergy or support services for the clergy. So there is no other populations in Vatican City, and it is very small. So the Vatican is a bit of an anomaly. But for the most part, the rest are Islamic theocratic nations, which is what we're talking about here. Now, the political structure that you'll see, this is Iran, which does have a pretty average theocratic structure. Now, as you notice, it does have voters, but anybody the voters vote for has to be selected by the Guardian Council, which is selected by the Supreme Leader. So the Supreme Leader is really where all representatives come from. And what you'll notice in this structure is that things like the military, the mosque, so all the churches, the justice system, and indeed the media is under the direct control of the Supreme Leader, the highest clergy official in that country. And this isn't a coincidence. This is very deliberate. Basically, he has nearly all the power in the country. There is no separation of power, and I'll touch on that later. And also that the media is 100%, there is no fourth estate. The fourth estate is part of the actual executive of the country. Now, let's compare this with a republic. And this republic, most of you will probably know pretty well, is the United States of America. So as we can see, there is a clear delineation between the powers. You've got the legislative with the Congress and the House of Representatives and the Senate. You've got the executive and the president, and then the the judiciary with the Supreme Court and the state courts. There's a clear delineation of power between them. If you compare this to the previous slide, there is no delineation of power. The Supreme Leader has direct control over the judicial, direct control. He also chooses who serves as part of the legislature, because don't forget, the voters can only vote for those people that the Guardian Council, which is chosen by the Supreme Leader, puts up. So you can't vote for anybody else. So what we have is a imbalance of power, and there's problems with this. And let's see those problems and sort of so the political stability of theocratic nations. Now, this comes from the World Bank 2019 index of 194 nations. So the theocracies, Yemen at negative 2.77, it's 194th in the world for political stability. Afghanistan, 192nd in the world for political stability. Saudi Arabia is the absolute best at 133rd out of 194 nations for political stability. So theocracy does not get you any more political stability at all. Corruption control. Again, you probably noticed the pattern here. Bottom of the list, Yemen, Afghanistan, Iran, Sudan, Mauritania, and Saudi Arabia is a bit of an anomaly, but you know, that's one country out of 7 that have even above half, way up that list of nations. Civil liberty, and I think you'll know where this one will go. Basically, this measures from 7 being a weak civil liberty to 1 being strong civil liberty. And this is the most despotic nations in the world. So at 5th, we've got Saudi Arabia, 5th in the world for sort of despotic or a lack of civil liberty. Afghanistan is 9th. 22nd is Iran. All of these countries are more than halfway up that list of despotic nations. So this is problems in the Quran, and there's a lot of problems here. The problem with divine guidance as a mandate for power. Number 1, divine will of a God is not known directly. Nobody knows what God actually thinks. They all have to defer to a religious text. And the central religious text can be interpreted differently by different religious leaders. In fact, you notice this a lot where in Saudi Arabia, certain clergies or imam have made fatwas that contradict others. There is no way to know which one has the correct divine guidance and which one does not. There is no limitations on divine power, and therefore no limitations on what laws can be implemented. As long as it is divinely guided, then you can implement literally anything. The divine commands are seen as unchallengeable. So if you want to, if for some reason you believe that this divine guidance is not divine, you would be seen as somebody who is trying to challenge the will of God. And that's not allowed in these very religious nations. And it is impossible to hold these religious leaders to account, as they are seen as infallible. They cannot make mistakes. So it is not possible to say, hey, you made a mistake, because they, according to their doctrine, they are incapable of making a mistake. So let's look at the Quran. Surah 24:2, it prescribes 100 lashes for zina, unmarried sex. 100 lashes. Under the UN, that's completely outlawed. Corporal punishment is not something that you should do. Surah 9:5 commands to slay idolaters where you find them. If they do repent and pay a tax, they are to be freed. Now, I don't know what other way you can sort of point to a theocracy really by force and threat of death to convert people to their religion. In 434, it states that men are the managers of women, and if a wife does not listen to advise them, if they won't listen to your advice, keep away from in the bed, and if that doesn't work, you are to beat them. Yes, that's correct. That's what that says. So I'm not sure what Claire wants to advocate for in this particular theocracy. I'm going to enjoy talking to her and finding out exactly where she thinks this fits in with a sort of modern system of government. But as a constitutional document, the Quran is absolutely lacking. So it has nothing that separates the government from a church, so that the church can implement only believers or only their people into the state and exclude all others, providing underrepresentation for the general populace. It has no separation of powers, as I mentioned earlier. This is incredibly dangerous because if you do not have separation of powers, and the genius thing about the United States Constitution is that all 3 of its powers, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, all provide checks and balances on one another's power. That is why the Western nations and the ones that have this sort of modern constitutional documents behind them have less corruption. It's because there are checks on what any individual or group of individuals can do within the country. There is no freedom of press. As you saw with the previous one, Iran, which is very emblematic of the modern theocratical state, the press is almost always at the beck and call of the clergy. There is no oversight from the press, and therefore it is irrelevant. It is only a propaganda tool of the religion of the day, and that is all it is. There's no right to assembly in the Quran. There's no right to a jury of your peers. Now, that does say there's a right to a trial, but you get a judge from guess where? Oh, the clergy. Isn't that funny? And
30
you're
seconds.
Thank you. And you're
Yeah.
unable to amend anything contained within. So if something is not working in the current one, you can't amend it. Now, there's no codification of the laws in the Quran. You cannot, it is not a legal document set up to provide transparency. It is a religious document. There's no understanding of precedent. Only 9% of the Quran deals with legal matters, and it's hard to distinguish personal and moral obligations. So basically, some of it says you should do it, some of it says you have to do it. People disagree on what is what. And female testimony only counts as half as much evidence as male testimony. Two women as witnesses equals one man. So thank you very much for listening. That's my overview, and I do apologise. I did time that earlier, but I must have taken a bit longer. So thank you very much for listening, and back to you, James and Amy.
Woohoo. Thank you
Mark.
so very much, Mark, for your opening statement. And with that, the flagpoles are set down. Dun, dun, dun.
Amy's got the polls.
And I'm going to hand it over to Claire for her 5-minute rebuttal. Claire, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Now, I will deal point by point with what Mark has said about chapter 24, verse 2 of the Quran about punishing unmarried parents as sex offenders. You either think it's a good idea to allow unmarried parents to be unmarried parents, or you think they are could be the agents of chaos and criminality, since most convicted criminals are in fact from fatherless homes. So I would argue that the ends justify the means, because you need to discourage a practice that would in fact lower standards of education and behavior in the next generation and cause the decline and fall of your civilization. And as I think it could certainly be argued in the West, which has been desecrating marriage for the past 50 years. On the question of chapter 9, verse 5, it's a misquote from a verse in the Quran that is actually about a war situation. So it's an instruction of battle orders to untrained men, untrained in the martial arts, to do what had to be done in order to fend off their attackers. So, it is a war. It doesn't say kill non-Muslims because they are non-Muslims, because the verse says, when the sacred months have passed, then kill polytheists wherever you find them. But if they establish prayer and give zakah, if you win against them, then let them go their own way. So it's not an indiscriminate command to kill non-Muslims just because they're non-Muslims. It is strictly confined in time, one would argue, as well as in battle conditions. Now, chapter 4, verse 34, which I call the wife-beating verse, well, I have a particular interpretation of it that actually won't result in wives being beaten. And in any case, it is a staged process. So it's kind of like before you're sacked from your employment, you get a verbal warning, you get a written warning, and you get a final warning. And then you could get a slap on the wrist, and the husband can proceed to divorce because he's given you so many warnings for doing this terrible thing that he ends up getting so annoyed that he might beat you for it, such as never cleaning the house and going clubbing every night, or never looking after the children, or whatever it is that her husband feels that the wife has done that endangers the marriage. And as for the question of separating the church from the state. I think that's a peculiarity of Christianity, because it was so vicious in its operation in the old world, in which we know the Christian practice of heretic burning was conducted on Europeans who denied the divinity of Jesus. So you could just question the Trinity and find yourself being burnt at the stake, as many people were at the time. And of course, it was a terrible thing. And as soon as the Europeans settled in America, what did they do? They rejected this kind of law for themselves in the New World. And we know that 5 of the founding fathers were not even Trinitarians, i.e. not even Christian, and they hated the doctrine of the Trinity, as we know from Jefferson's memoirs. So he was very much against the Trinity, and Islam actually rejects the Trinity, as does Judaism, which they regard as idolatry and blasphemy. So the question of no right to assembly, that the Quran doesn't stop you from
about 30 seconds
gathering in public places, and we could still practice jury trials. And did you say my 5 minutes was up? I have only 2 more things, which is about female testimony. Female testimony only applies in the witnessing of loan agreements where 2 women are required and only 1 man, but that's only in a matter of loan agreements. And consultation, shura, is a command of the Quran. And obviously, if you want to govern any country, you need to consult the people and ask them, how am I doing? Am I governing right? And if you don't like it, tell us and we'll do better. And that is actually a command in the Quran that a government has to do. And thank you for allowing me to finish my points.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so very much, Claire, for your rebuttal. And with that, we're going to hand it over to Mark for your 5-minute rebuttal.
Thank you so much, Amy. I really appreciate it. So first off, like you say, theocracy gives more rights than Western sort of society would, but you don't explain how it does this or where it does this. You haven't explained that at all. So basically, you said politicians change meaning of the words, which not really. People change meaning of the words. They change naturally with society over time. I don't think politicians are going out and changing them on their own. I think words just change. It's completely ridiculous to think that a politician will come forward and change one thing to another and it will just catch on. No, society does that. So sort of mental health under, you mentioned, it's better under theocracy. There is no evidence to show this is the case. There is just a lack of treatment of mental health in a theocracy. There's nothing to say that it's any better. The Aztecs, I don't know why you even brought them up. They practiced human sacrifices. You said they were illiterate. Not all of them. The priests were actually literate and did have their own code of laws, their own religious documents. You couldn't really call it documents, but they did, do this kind of thing. So basically you said that written scripture was not up for interpretation, and that is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. You're just saying that different theocracies interpret the Quran completely differently. So how is it not up for interpretation? Is just, I don't understand that, because it absolutely is. And I even mentioned a cleric in Saudi Arabia making a fatwa that disagreed with the sort of clerical leader at the time. So obviously they are up for interpretation. Just because you don't want them to be interpreted differently doesn't mean that people don't do that. And the whole idea that they can't change, so that's a good thing. It's not a good thing. As society progresses and we learn more things and new things come in and there are new discoveries, and even, for instance, the internet changed everything we know. The fact that laws can't change is not good. We need to be able to update laws with the way that society is progressing. A dynamic system has to be. If laws did not change and they were static, there would still be slaves today. And that would not be a good thing. Laws do need to change. The West is in decline. I've heard this from Claire before. There is literally nothing to support that the West is in decline. Is China becoming a greater and greater power in the world? Sure, but that doesn't mean the West is just in decline. In fact, look at any metric, we're doing the best that we ever have in the past. These stolen election stuff, I'm really not going to get into conspiracy theories and stuff like that. I mean, it's sort of ridiculous. So this hypothetical sort of supreme authority, it only works if people accept that not everybody in the West accepts it. And even Claire acknowledges that not everybody accepts it. And she says it solves problems, but doesn't say how it solves problems. She makes absolutely no explanation of how it strengthens the institutions that she's talking about. She just says it will, even though we've never seen that in any theocracy anywhere in the world ever. It just is, well, question mark. It's how does it happen? And you said that the court has, I think that you mentioned this earlier, that the court has a judge. Yeah, no jury though. And you said that idolatry, it's controversial to some people. Well, it's deadly to others. As I pointed out, it is permissible to kill atheists or other religious people or pagans under a certain set of circumstances, which is highly up for interpretation because the laws are not codified. They are not clear set out examples of what is and what is not against the law. It is really a religious text, which means that part of it is sort of poetic and can be interpreted in a number of different ways. This is the problem with non-codified laws. And suffering.
30 seconds to go.
Thank you very much. Suffering it leads to sin. Well, that's ridiculous. People that have never sinned or live perfect lives can still suffer from disease and other things. Sin just doesn't automatically create suffering, and I've got no idea why I would consider the things you consider sin to be sinful. The whole idea is that you just don't like things and then you say, hey, that causes all the suffering in the world. It's ridiculous. Suffering is just something that happens, and we can look at the reasons behind that. But just to label all suffering is caused by sin is just baseless. I'm sorry. And your solution is to find which things have been broken most and then address them. And I've got a funny feeling that the things that have been broken most, or the laws that have been broken most, will be the things that you personally find the most objectionable.
Woohoo! All right,
Thank you,
folks. Thank you so very much, Mark. And all of our chips are now on the table. Thus, we're going to move into 40 minutes of open discussion. Ladies and gentlemen.
Are you ready, Amy? Are you ready for it?
The floor is all yours. My body is ready.
Your body is ready. I think they're ready, so.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Amy. Much love. Okay, Claire. So I'm just going to open up with a few things that I want to go through. Just basically how your theocracy would fit in with the current United Nations standards on human rights. You mentioned that people could kill under a certain, or kill non-believers under a certain point of view, unless they sort of
say that.
Under a certain circumstances.
In battle situations, in the battlefield, that verse that you quoted. Okay. It's a battle order.
Okay, well let's read it out and see what it actually says, or the translation for it. But when the forbidden months are past, then fight and slay the pagans wherever you find them, and seize them, beleaguer them, and lie in wait for them in every stratagem of war. But if they repent and establish regular prayers and practice regular charity, then open the way for them. For Allah is oft forgiving, most merciful. Is that the verse?
Yes, and before that would be verse 4, and you can tell that it's all about treaties and war and stuff like that. It's not like, let Muslims just go and kill these non-Muslims.
Okay. Let's say that. Let's concede that point on that one. Okay, let's just concede that point. But the UN specifically prohibits, even during wartime, religious conversions of the people that you are fighting against. Okay, so how does that?
There's a chapter, there's a verse, chapter 2, verse 256, which guarantees freedom of belief. And there's also a verse about how to treat your prisoners of war. And there's never anything about forced conversions, because chapter 2, verse 256 says, there is no compulsion in belief. Truth stands clear from error. So it allows you to believe whatever you want to believe.
Does that say kill them, and if they convert, then forgive them? Does that sword verse say that or not say that?
It says...
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to read. And when the sacred months have passed, then kill the polytheists where you find them, and capture them and besiege them, and sit in wait for them at every place of ambush. But if they should repent, establish prayer, and give zakah, let them go on their way.
Yeah, but those who don't know, the zakat is the religious tax that Muslims do pay to the church.
Yeah, and
So
it's a poor due. It's been translated as and practice regular charity, or the poor rate, or
right. But basically, it says that if they don't convert to Islam, then you are killing them. But if they convert to Islam, to let them go. Don't kill them. That's what it says.
Yeah, but that verse, in the context of the forbidden months, that was that kind of so there was a time of war when farmers during after they harvested their crop and everything, they had time, and then they would go around and raid the territory of neighboring countries. So there was a time for war. So and that was a practice of the time that they would.
But how does that fit in with the current UN civil rights?
Saying don't do that.
Which says
you
that
don't do this sort of thing anymore. Because that verse.
Where does it say don't? Okay, I understand that it's historic and it's been in the past, but you're advocating for this book to be the foundation of our current legal system, and that's the
that
problem.
verse would not apply.
Why wouldn't it apply? Aren't you advocating for this book?
Because we don't do this sort of thing about sacred months and raid other farmers' territory and that kind of thing.
So here's the problem. I acknowledge that you may not believe that verse should apply. But would you agree that some people who read it and interpret it do think that verse should apply?
Well, nobody has a right to interpret these things but the Islamic State government.
But the Islamic State government interpret it in a way that I see it right now. That a lot of people have disagreements on what this verse means, correct?
Yes, but it's not up to them. It's for the government. It's for Muhammad as military and political leader to interpret it. That verse was directed to him.
Can we ask Muhammad?
No, we can't. But I mean,
no,
if you
we
want
can't.
to reason that analogy, it would have to be the leader of a group of people who is considered legitimately the government of those people. And no Muslim has any right to interpret that verse and then say, we're going to go and kill non-Muslims.
But
or they'd be done for murder.
But the people don't get to choose that leader. The leader comes out of the clergy who will believe what they believe. And theocracies have a general tendency to go to more fundamentalism because it is usually the most fundamental and conservative people that reach the higher echelons of that clergy. And that's the problem. You then have a leader that can interpret it. When you say, hey, it stops misinterpretations of the document from happening, it doesn't, because people still disagree over the interpretation.
Yes, I agree with you that there's always a danger of say the US Constitution being ignored or misinterpreted or distorted. And the thing is, the sin is its own punishment. If you're going to ignore the rules, eventually you will suffer. And we know from what the Muslims are now that they decline because they ignored their own rules. Because of, you think of the Abbasid and Umayyad and Ottoman Empire. They declined because they did okay until they started breaking their own rules in perhaps the same way that the Americans are breaking their own rules.
I don't
but
think
at
so.
least
I
you can sort
think
of
they.
refer to the original rules and say, "Oh, we did this bad thing. We didn't, we distorted that rule because we didn't
I
want to
don't think
follow
so.
it."
I think they stagnated because they sort of got trapped in these incredibly theocratic nations that weren't progressing and they didn't advance. They didn't change with the times. They just were the same stagnant place where they were the entire time. And when you say like, oh, you can distort the constitution, you can distort this, well, yeah, I guess that's true in a sense, but there's a big difference between a religious document where, the forbidden months can be interpreted in a number of different ways, and codified laws which have a very specific language to stop misinterpretation. And this is
You would have to
problem with the
codify the
Quran.
Quran. I mean, if my idea of theocracy were adopted, you would have to, work
Then
out which.
whose interpretation are you codifying? This is
Well,
the
it would be
same
mine.
problem.
It would be mine.
It would be yours.
While consulting, legal minds and scholars. Yes, I mean, I wouldn't do it all on my own.
So how does your system implement a structure of government that would prevent the executive from gaining too much power over the legislative and judicial bodies and therefore corrupting those bodies with the interests of a single person or a group that represents a specified interest?
The definition of a caliph. I mean, it's controversial even amongst Muslims, but
Yeah.
what
It's
I've
argued,
managed
it's
to
interpreted
get is
differently,
a
sure.
constitutional dictator. So it means that this leader has to govern according to the rules of the principles of the Quran. And if it is found that he isn't, or enough people under him notice that he isn't, they can get rid of him. So
How?
that
How can they get
by
rid of him?
overthrowing him in one way or another.
So you're basically advocating for a absolute dictator, just one that's
a constitutional dictator.
Well,
He has to govern
sure,
according to the
okay.
rules
Well, a
of
constitutional
the
dictator. Well, a constitutional dictator that you sometimes would need to violently overthrow if he does not want to give up that power.
That's the case in any country, whether Muslim or not.
No,
if you govern badly enough, you will get overthrown.
No,
whether you are emperor of China or some tin pot dictatorship in South America.
In a
That's what always
democracy,
happens.
in a democracy, you can vote out the person.
Okay,
I don't know how you're not understanding this.
Hitler was voted in.
Yes, he was voted in, and he was made into a dictator. Absolutely, I get that. He
changed the laws. I mean, in quite an orderly way. Actually,
Yeah.
He suspended the constitution.
Yeah.
So it was done.
Good thing I'm not advocating for that, but I want to get away from that particular paradigm and go back to my original question, which was how do you ensure that one person, I mean, if your answer is just, hey, I wouldn't ensure that one person couldn't have power over the legislative and the judiciary and would just be an absolute dictator within the bounds of this constitution, then fine. That's what you're advocating for.
Okay. You put it this way. If China were Muslim, Xi Jinping would be considered the caliph, right? And if so, there is a way of getting rid of him because of the way the Chinese Communist Party is structured. So in the Politburo, I think it's a one with 7 or 9 members. That is where the next president of China is chosen, from amongst a small group. So if say that leader is not doing right, they'll find a way of getting rid of him.
Yeah, and I think that China doesn't have enough separation, and you've got a very small interest group. In this case, not the clergy of a specific religion, but in this case, the kind of Chinese Communist Party that allows that leader to basically have absolute power on behalf. It's an oligarchy, but basically they have power on behalf
The
of
West
that.
is an oligarchy, but China is
No.
a
Let me finish. No. Let me finish. That they have that one party having the controlling interest over all three of the powers: the judiciary, the legislative, and the executive. It's a good thing I don't advocate for China and Chinese communism. Right? Because that's not what I'm advocating for. You're basically saying, hey, but China's a really bad system. Yeah, it is. It's terrible. I agree. But it doesn't address the question I have, which is how do you ensure that a theocracy doesn't have the same problem where the army, media, the legislative, the judiciary is all under the control of the executive, and you have not answered that.
The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. This means that you must have the best people in the political establishment who can be trusted to care about the rules. And if you don't have these people already in place, then of course they're all going to be corrupt and use rules and abuse their powers and all that. And that's why we need really some idea of private conscience. So, we need to be able to feel guilty if we tell lies or go against the rules, even if we got away with it. And we need to develop a conscience. And because so many people now are not clear about what the rules are, they will have different ideas about what is right or wrong. And that, I think, is a problem. And if we can't agree, or if we don't even have shared values, then you haven't got a functioning moral system. And religion is a moral system. And so far in the West, there isn't one, because hardly anybody even believes in Christianity anymore. And that, I think, is a great problem.
Okay, so you sort of gish-gulped a bit there away from what I was asking. I mean, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance is a good quote, but really what you want to do is have a good system that has checks and balances upon power to begin with. And this whole idea that private consciousness and people will just do the right... No, they don't. Like I showed in those slides, just let me finish, the most... corrupt nations are the theocracies throughout the world. The reason why is because there is no check on the clergy's power. And unfortunately, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Okay, that was Bell, I think, said that.
Lord Acton.
Was it Lord Acton? Oh, yeah, okay. Well, whoever said it, it is absolutely true. And people don't just go, oh, well, we're going to give this guy power and he will do the right thing because he's paying attention to some document. It just doesn't happen. I'm sorry, Claire, but this is real. It's time to tune into Reality FM.
Have you heard of the Mandate of Heaven? I mean, talking about China, are you familiar with
Mandate of Heaven? Yes, which was the emperors during the which dynasty was it? Yeah, I have heard of it. Yes.
It actually preceded Confucius. So the idea was that every ruler it was implied that every ruler started with a Mandate of Heaven, which would be withdrawn if they abused their power, if they misgoverned and oppressed their people. And you can see this through pestilence, through famine, through natural disasters and revolutions and invasions. So
what a stupid political system, right? I mean,
no. The whole purpose of the Mandate of Heaven is to warn the Emperor of China to watch it and not abuse his power, or these bad things will happen to him and his empire, and he'll be out on his ear.
No, I get what you're saying, Claire, but the problem is that what a ruler may be doing. For instance, take this example. The Chinese emperor, they may have been the best person to handle this famine, and a famine will come along no matter what. It's not a sign from God, and it's not a signature of some thing saying, "Hey, Emperor of China, you're doing a bad job." It's just this stuff happens, right? Famines happen. That emperor may have been the best person to address it, or not.
Well, who else if not the emperor? He's the one with ultimate responsibility for governing the country.
Sure. And they were incredibly corrupt. The emperors of China were incredibly corrupt.
corrupt. I mean, this was what Confucius was on about. He was saying, don't have all these annoying laws that people will just evade because they hate you. If you, Emperor of China, you behave properly, then the people will love you and just want to please you without you even asking. So behave well.
And it would be really nice if people did that, but people don't do that. It's time to get with reality, that if you give power to individuals, let me finish, if you give power to individuals, you must always have a way to check that power if it gets out of control. And you do not have that. You have
the rules are the thing that will help people check that power. So you can say, well, is our government this, that, or the other, and maybe the 7 tick list of the no-hike laws that I suggested, or is our government breaking the rules? And this is how you can tell.
How is your theocracy going to check that power? If the clergy is all corrupt and they've elected
there won't be a clergy. There won't be a clergy under my theocracy.
So who
because
chooses?
The judiciary would be the closest thing to clergy. I mean, I think that the priesthood is a parasitical class because they will become corrupt.
Okay,
but
so
at
just
least with the judiciary, everything they decide will be in open court, and it will be a legal decision, and there will be people arguing for or against their, whatever.
Okay, so just say the judiciary becomes corrupt and they elect a supreme leader of whatever sort that you want, who is corrupt as well and is purposely lining their own pockets and giving preferential treatment to the members of the judiciary. What is the check on that power that will stop them from doing that when they have control over the army and the media and everything?
Rebellion in the end.
Rebellion.
Yes. In the end, if nothing works, if you go to court and you never get the right decision because the courts are corrupt, if you do, in the end there will be rebellion.
Might I remind you, Claire, this is the system that you are advocating to be more stable than Western democracy.
Yes, because of the rule of law. It's important to have the rule of law. And the rule of law can only be said to exist if the courts follow the law.
I'm sorry, Claire, but you've just advocated for a check and balance on power, something to be understood to be in every single political system, as being rebellion.
No,
that's what you've advocated for.
If the rule of law breaks down, there will be rebellion because the people who are oppressed will feel there is no other way to get rid of their oppressor other than through violence, which is why you need the rule of law for people to go to court if there's any injustice. There's judicial review and that kind of thing, which the Americans started. So these things have to work. But if say the Americans think, all the laws are corrupt, we can never get justice even through the Supreme Court, then they'll have another think about what to do next. But obviously the rule of law has to be seen to be working, for people to have confidence in the system. So what?
So you've just said that sort of, so this rebellion idea. But this is absolutely crazy. So every system corrupts, right? Every system. Name a system that hasn't had
potentially capable of being corrupted. Yes.
What system hasn't? What system hasn't?
Well,
what system has had no corruption? Claire, what system has had no corruption?
I'm certainly not going to say that no system is capable of being corrupted. I am saying that
what system has had no corruption? What system has had?
Is capable of being subverted.
But some are more than others because some have checks and balances on power and some do not. For instance, if you've got a dictatorship, it's very susceptible to corruption because there is no check on that dictator's power. There is nothing to stop him from becoming corrupt. Absolutely nothing.
You need a ruling class who are fit to be the ruling class. Okay, that's what you need. Because the ruling class will always be the elite, and they need to have better morals and the people that they rule over, that
The
they have
problem-
to care about the
The
people.
problem is if they don't, your only solution is for a violent upheaval with presumably the help of the army under that ruling class, which you may not have, right? Because the army would be under the ruling class to rise up and ensure a bloody civil war that would somehow take down the people who happen to have all the guns. It's ridiculous. What you've described is a pathway to oppression.
I'm stating what actually happens in the real world. Military dictatorships are caused when the original government is so bad that the military feel they have to take over because they're so fed up with the whole thing. That's what previously happened. Because if you watch the Hindu system,
it depends on the army and the
dictatorship.
place, and I mean sometimes they are just seizing control. It's not always. I think that's a bit simplistic, Claire. It's not always the case that the government is.
You look at the Hindu caste system, right? The Hindu caste system,
right? Okay.
The warrior class is below the priesthood, right? It goes priesthood, a warrior class, merchants, laborers, and the untouchables. That is the Hindu caste system. The priesthood is supposed to be, the clever people, kind of like druids who know about astronomy and whatever. And the military is the muscle. So if you piss off the muscle so much that they rebel and say, we're not going to put up with this anymore, and actually if we did, the people would support us because you've been so terrible as a priesthood or as a monarch, then that is what happens. That is how military dictatorships start.
Yeah, but
they know their place. If the monarch or the ruler is known to be morally superior, I mean, this situation actually exists in China.
Okay, that's okay. The Hindu caste system, which I'm not advocating for that either.
I'm just saying that's how it is.
But you do have places like North Korea where the leader is incredibly corrupt and also gives bribes to the head of the military, thus getting them on side, and the people are just suffering in oppression, and there is no rising up from there because the army is under control of the supreme leader, and that's the problem. It's not a case of, my system won't have corruption. It's unrealistic. What you've got to have is checks and balances on those power structures so that a corrupt individual or a corrupt group cannot use them to oppress the people.
And you allow the judiciary. The judiciary must be independent. Because
why is the judiciary immune to corruption? Why is the judiciary suddenly immune to corruption?
I don't say it's immune. I'm saying it's harder to corrupt a judiciary than a priesthood. Because the judiciary... Why? Because legal decisions have to be argued over. They have to be heard in open court. They're subject to appeal. So, it's harder for a judiciary to be corrupt. Not that I'm saying it will never be corrupt. But I'm saying that these rules are the checks and balances to keep people, to keep the ship of state on the straight and narrow, but only if there are competent and principled people who care when they notice that the rules are being broken. But if the people in charge don't care about these things, then you are pretty much fucked.
But the problem is that you think that these people are trustworthy and not corrupt, and you only find out once they have the power. And if your only way to solve that problem is violent upheaval, well, I think your state would be a nightmare.
I think you're misrepresenting me. I'm saying it's a fact of life that if you are so bad as a government that your people end up rebelling against you, then, obviously you have been a bad ruler. That's what I'm saying.
And it's a terrible way to run a country, is sort of having your checks and balances. One of the ways you can remove someone from power as being, in your words, rebellion. That's a terrible way to run a country.
So bad, if you let the rule of law break down so badly that the ordinary people think they're never going to get justice from the police or the courts.
Yes, I agree. Your system is I agree your system is terrible because there is no way to remove that person. And that's what I've been asking over and over and over. And you haven't provided any way.
What exactly are you asking me? I'm saying that if the system is so corrupt and the people think that the only way to get rid of you is through armed rebellion, this is
then
not
you will
just
have armed
the
rebellion.
case for a theocracy. It could be any kind of government. You can say that you have these sort of perfect set of rules, but if in practice you break them and flout them, then the people are not going to be happy and
So
want you gone.
in this theocracy, do the people have the right to vote out whoever is in charge and thus provide a remedy to unjust power?
Yeah, I don't see why people can't have elections even in a one-party state.
Then how are you talking about a theocracy?
A theocracy doesn't forbid elections. In fact, the Quran actually provides for consultation, which arguably is what democracy is. But you know.
But the whole point of it is that you are acting upon divine guidance. You are acting upon the divine will of God. So how
okay, the best thing to understand God is through his laws, okay? And I'm saying it's through the Quran. People may disagree, but that's the best way of understanding God, because it's like, you know, this is what the Muslims believe, that the Quran is the word of God. So if you want to know God, read the Quran and see how you like it. It's not sort of, we have to follow divine will. It's already, the instructions are written and translated and accessible on the internet.
So you're not advocating for any kind of theocracy that's been that anybody would understand the term, because you're advocating for the one document to represent all of the constitution or the principles of the land or of the country to be the Quran, but you're not adhering to any kind of clerical representation of that document, and you're not.
Islam does not have a priesthood. They don't have a priesthood, and the closest thing you have to a priesthood would be the judiciary, who interpret the principles of the Quran.
Well, that would just put the judiciary in that position of having power.
Yes,
I mean, instead of the executive
classes. I mean, the government is, you know, consists of the judiciary, the executive,
and the legislative.
Yes,
and the legislative. Yes.
Yes.
So there's no legislative there. Okay, you don't have a legislative. Do you understand that?
Well, the legislative would be, well, how do we apply these principles? And there will always be argument about it.
That's the judiciary does that. The judiciary are the ones that interpret the law in any system. The legislative are the ones that create laws.
Yeah, but we will still need laws about, I don't know, littering and highway code or whatever, you know, that the Quran doesn't talk about, right? You know, about whether to drive on the left or the right side of the road. The Quran is silent on that. So there will need to be some kind of legislature to say, you know, we need this law about parking or you know, things like that the Quran actually is silent on.
Do we?
Yeah,
I don't know. This is your system. I have no idea what you're advocating for.
Well, I'm saying that, okay, the secular Quran is about infusing your legal system with Quranic principles. And you know, it's up to the country to choose
from what I can tell, you're basically just saying, hey, some of the laws, the lawmakers in a democratic system should implement into this democratic system because they're good laws, which isn't a theocracy.
Well, you just assume that, you know, theocracy is bad and everything about the Quran is bad. But
it's pretty bad.
I'm just saying, we need the concept of a hypothetical supreme authority, you know, just comes anyway, whether you believe in God or not. You know, an example I can give you is that, you know, you have some legal action that you keep appealing, you know, all the way to the Supreme Court of Australia, and you still don't get justice.
High Court.
High Court, and then after that, it's
Supreme Court, then High Court in Australia. It's High Court.
And then, okay, and then there's nothing higher than that.
Correct. High Court's the highest.
Oh, so you're referring to the UK again? Or
No,
technically you are?
that's what it's like in Australia. You said
Gosh,
in
you don't-
Australia.
Okay, because I mean, you know, in the UK we have the High Court and then the Appeal Court and then the Supreme Court. But anyway, okay, you go to the highest authority in the land.
Sure,
maybe
okay.
there's an international court, and you still don't get justice, and then you think hypothetically there is this just court that would have given me my justice if only existed, you know, on earth. But you know, but there is this hypothetical idea of ideal justice. And you know, that would come under the umbrella of the Abrahamic God, I would say.
I don't think there is ideal justice. I'm not sure what you mean by ideal
The
justice.
theory of ideal justice.
Well, I mean, you can sort of consider a certain just outcome to be either just or, you know, a certain outcome that is delivered by a judicial system to be either just or not just. I don't know where you're getting this idealism from. And it seems like a lot of the stuff that you've done and you've said are idealistic ideas that just would not work in the real world. They just wouldn't. I mean, look at the, you know, you advocate for 100 lashes for people, you know, in non-married relationships kind of thing. You said unmarried parents, which is not what the Quran says. It says that people who are unmarried that have sexual relations will get 100 lashes.
Well, that's my particular way of interpreting it, because I don't want bedroom police saying you
Claire,
should have done it.
people
But I'm saying, you know, that you're not going to be able to deny it when you're caught having babies without a marriage certificate.
And
You know, you're accused, and you can't. You know, unless you say, "Oh, it's a virgin birth" or something, you're not going to get away with it.
Well, why would you have to deny it? Because you're afraid of getting 100 lashes for simply something. Why is that a good thing? The UN specifically prohibits corporal punishment. How would that fit
The UN
with the
is a
United
liberal
Nations?
thing, isn't it?
No, it's the United Nations. I can pull it up for you.
It's liberal and controlled by Western nations.
No, it's the United Nations. There's nothing liberal or conservative about preventing corporal punishment, because A, it's cruel and unjust, and B, it doesn't work. We know it doesn't work.
How do you know it doesn't work?
Because all the countries that have corporal punishment have some of the worst crime rates in the world, while the ones that focus on rehabilitation.
Which countries have corporal punishment? Are you talking about Singapore? They have corporal punishment. Are you talking about Singapore?
Okay, so the countries that don't, for instance, they focus on rehabilitation are places like Iceland and the Netherlands, right? The Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, places like this, and their crime rates are very low.
Well,
right?
I've heard terrible things about Malmö in Sweden.
Okay.
And no-go areas where the
there's no-go areas. Trump did that one about their no-go areas, and the Swedish politicians were amazed to find out that there are no-go areas in their own country. The point is that the United Nations specifically prohibits corporal punishment because it is cruel and unjust, and it's not a liberal sentiment. Not even conservatives and Republicans believe that we should see having people whipped because they dared to have a relationship with somebody. I'm sorry, Claire, but that is not something
they would understand. And anyway, I think corporal punishment for other crimes would be cheaper than incarceration and would save the taxpayer money.
But it's not effective.
And it would also work as a punishment plus deterrence if it is made public.
Yeah,
and the Quran doesn't forbid it. In fact,
and only things like the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights says it's bad.
You're making the UN your hypothetical, your supreme authority, aren't you?
Well, not really. I mean, that's all countries coming together and deciding on what is acceptable.
I think it's all Western countries, to be fair.
All what, sorry?
Liberal Western countries.
No, the United Nations is all countries coming together. What are you talking about? I mean,
I know it's dominated by Western countries who are liberal.
Look,
Other
I'm not,
countries, instinctively.
look, I really am not interested in your conspiracy theories about what the United Nations is and is not. But at the end of the day, they do keep track of human rights and civil liberties for people. And that is important, whether you believe it or not. And
Well,
you know,
the Quran would be, well, all the human rights you need are in the Quran.
what, the 100 lashes for people?
For unmarried parents, because we know about the criminality of
it doesn't say for unmarried parents. It doesn't say that.
Well, I mean, it's obvious. It's like if you're not married and you have sex, then you're
it's
gonna get
not
knocked
obvious,
out,
Claire. It's not. It's not obvious. That is why there's so many disagreements on what it actually means, and why in different theocratical countries different punishments are implemented. It's because it's not obvious, because the laws are not codified, and there is no clear intent and no clear separation between what is moral and what is legal. And that is usual for a religious document, but it makes a terrible premise for a country.
Well, if it were adopted in Australia, then there would be an Australian interpretation of the Quran. If it were adopted in New Zealand, they might have a slightly different interpretation. But broadly, that would be kind of the thing.
But
they might have their own, national differences. And then we'll see which country does better.
You are advocating for whipping people, for participating in relationships outside of marriage, which is
why
repugnant.
Are you making it sound so outlandish? White people, once
because
upon a time,
it is repugnant. And it is
you're now a different person to your grandparents, who would probably be agreeing with me.
No, I don't think so. I don't think my grandparents would endorse that at all. They were very kind people who didn't like to see other people in pain. It doesn't matter. How does that matter? It doesn't matter at all. This is just a massive red herring.
Mostly come from fatherless homes, and
if you think my poppy, rest his soul or whatever, may he rest in peace, my poppy would endorse whipping people, you are sadly mistaken, Claire. I think I know my grandparents, or when they lived, better than you. I don't care. I don't care. It was wrong then and it's wrong now. And if you want, I've got a video of a pair of teenagers in Indonesia being whipped for, get this, cuddling in public. That's it. I've also got another one. I don't want to show this because it's pretty horrible, but also another one of a gay man being whipped in Indonesia
in Aceh province. Yes, I'm aware of that. Yes,
for being gay. That was his only crime, is just he was gay, which is repugnant. It's against United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, which is not a liberal organization. It is a conglomeration of representatives from all countries throughout the world who decided on how we would transition into a modern period of respect and understanding between nations. Period. I mean, just because you advocate for breaches in human rights, Claire, it makes it absolutely repugnant. And this is the problem. You don't see how that would affect societies. You don't have
people's behavior. Yeah, it would change.
No, it wouldn't. No, teenagers are going to have sex whether you whip them or not. It's going to happen. I hate to break it to you.
Fewer of them would if you said this is what's going to happen to you.
Islamic kids still have sex and they believe in the Quran is divine. Most Western countries don't. So you would be advocating for putting in a Quranic interpretation onto Western people who don't believe that the commandments are divine, and expecting them to adhere to them because of whippings. And let me tell you, it will not fucking happen. Reality, Claire, it won't happen. Kids are still going to have sex.
I'm not saying that it would eradicate completely the behavior, the undesirable behavior, but what it would do is discourage.
I don't see why it's undesirable. Why is it undesirable all of a sudden?
Because teen pregnancy is undesirable, isn't it?
It's still going to happen whether or not you whip them.
You seem to be saying in the long run we are all dead. Let's just kill ourselves.
No, I didn't say that at all. I did not say that at all. I'm saying that it's important that we deal with our fellow human beings with dignity and respect, rather than treat them like objects that we whip when they don't do what we want. There has been no progress made there's been no progress dropped in crime from that kind of corporal punishment or capital punishment, for that matter. It doesn't work.
Well, the murder rate has increased, hasn't it, since you stopped capital punishment?
Who?
It's a correlation.
Me? I haven't done anything. What are you talking about?
Not you, but Western governments, since they abolished the death penalty, that more murder, there's more homicide.
We can tell from the Scandinavian countries that when you focus on rehabilitation and understanding why people commit crimes and help them in their lives so they're not in a position like poverty and provide them support networks, you get much less reoccurrence of crime than if you just punitively punishment and then ostracize them from a loving society. That's what you get.
Prevention is better than cure, and convicted prisoners come from fatherless homes. I don't see how you can deny that.
So that's a red herring that is way off subject. Fatherless homes all of a sudden. Ridiculous.
Why?
Because crime still happens with people that have fathers as well as not fathers.
Yeah, I know, but the
simplify it all into one thing you happen to believe and then say, hey, that's the entire reason. It's simplistic and it does not address the actual problem.
There is a correlation, and you propose to ignore it because you
correlation is not causation. Correlation is not causation, Claire. Just because there is an increased crime rate among people in fatherless homes does not mean that is the cause of the problem. People with fatherless homes are also poorer, so it may actually be the lack of wealth in those families that is the cause and may have nothing to do with that fatherless outcome.
You make yourself poor by becoming an unwed teen mum. That's what you do.
That's not necessarily the case.
And all right, we're going to end it right there because we are going to move into our Q&A section.
Well,
Thank you.
Closings?
I think I'm going to do that at the end of questions.
You want to do that at the end? Okay.
I'm good. I'm good with whatever you want.
That's fine.
And so we currently have a bunch of questions. So thank you guys so much for sending them in. We're also a little lopsided with questions for Claire. Woohoo! So if you have any questions for Mark, now is the time to send them in. And feel free to tag me at Amy Newman. And all right. Let the fun begin. From Patrick. So doubt is the problem. Isn't doubt the basis of reflection and introspection? Isn't the basis of philosophy and science? So a governmental system without both of those? Directed at Claire.
I'm afraid I don't really understand the question.
Seems like he's saying, so doubt is the problem? Is doubt?
You mean people not knowing what the rules are? Yes, that's what I think is a problem, because the rules keep changing, so people are in doubt about what they should do for the best and how to plan for their lives. Yeah.
Question from Pat as well. Why would we consent as a society to submission to an Abrahamic system? Why not a pagan system, perhaps a Buddhist one? This is the problem with religious systems. Mine is best, quote unquote.
Thank you for that. I think if you're going to choose a religion, you're going to choose the most powerful God. That would make sense, right? And then you kind of check out the different religions of the world and to see who is doing best. And it would appear that Judaism is well, Jews are the world's most ancient and powerful tribe, it has been said, and Christianity and Islam are derived from Judaism, and they are and Christians, well, the last three global empires have been Christian. So you could say, well, Christianity is the bee's knees, except that it is that the West is declining, and I think that is a problem with Christianity, because most Westerners don't really believe that Jesus is God, which is the thing about Christianity. So I'm saying, well, the next Christianity adjacent religion is Islam, because the three Abrahamic religions worship the Abrahamic God, and Islam comes with a scripture, a book of rules that is sort of clear enough, and there are 6 Sharia theocracy, so it's kind of working. So that would be the reason to choose a Quran-based theocracy, and it's already. The words are agreed, and that there's a kind of tradition that you can, refer to. So that's a reason.
Mm-hmm. Question for Claire from Church Entropy. Why don't you promote Hinduism when it has a far higher marriage success rate than anything else?
Thank you, Church of Entropy, for your question. The reason why Hindu Indians have more stable marriages is because the female has very few rights. So they tend to put up with abuse rather than, because they have very few rights. But actually, there's a whole chapter on divorce in the Quran that tells you what you can and can't do. And obviously, Muslims treat marriage as a contract, and have marriage contracts. So I guess divorce would be based on breach of contract, and the damages that follow it, for breach of contract. So it's a more orderly kind of divorce, and there would be more rights for women under this system than under the Indian system.
You on mute, Amy?
You okay?
Haha, sometimes, always remember, folks, sometimes you double tap. Always remember with zombies. Question from Church of Entropy for Mark. If reincarnation was proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, would you become religious and want an awesome theocracy?
That's a good question. I think when you say become religious, if reincarnation was proven beyond a doubt, I would have to believe in reincarnation for a start. I think it would lead some credence to the idea that a God's behind it, but how then do you prove a God's behind it? I don't think that's necessarily the case, but it would be better evidence than what we currently have, and I'm anxiously looking forward to proving resurrection. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Question, comment from Leophilius. He's saying this shouldn't be an interpretation about verses of the Quran. What do you think?
He's saying there shouldn't be what?
This really shouldn't be about an interpretation of verses, I guess, specifically in the Quran.
Oh, but what should it be about then? I don't really understand his question.
I think
it was more of a comment on the state of the debate than a real question.
Yes, but okay. I'm tagged, so the Church of Entropy. Should moral activists be held to high moral standards? Is having sex with married geriatric for 10 years because he is famous moral?
I don't. Is that a question or a comment?
Should moral activists be held to high moral standards? It does have a question mark.
Oh, right. Well, not. I would say that we can't be morally perfect, or we would be God. So the option of, it's like murderers sort of know that there should be a law against murder. Thieves know that there should be a law against stealing. So I think as long as we can, acknowledge that these rules need to be the law, I don't see what the problem, even if, because murderers cannot actually say, yeah, although I'm a murderer, I think that there should still be a law against murder, because, there would be, total chaos if people were allowed, if it were legal to murder people. So I don't see any problem with morally imperfect people hoping for a higher standard.
Question from Pat, or more of a statement. The Islamic State doesn't interpret law for the subjugation of native peoples, ? Ask the Kurds and or the Yazdis. So I'll read that one more time. The Islamic State doesn't interpret law for the subjugation of native peoples, ?
Yeah, I guess the government with its court system would interpret the law, and it may or may not give justice to minorities. But this would be true whether it's a theocracy or not. We're all fallible. We can't guarantee that every legal decision will be the right one, or that our courts aren't corrupt. But we can hope for the best with a better kind of moral system that makes people care about the truth and follow the rules. And what the rules are is important, because obviously the law ought to encourage the right kind of behavior and discourage the wrong kind of behavior. And we hope that we've chosen the right system.
All right, moving along. We'll go with one that I know the preacher has for both of you. And so I'll ask this in the
Thank you, preacher.
opposite order. I'm trying to think who should answer first. But the preacher asked, my only question is, how do you know you are saved?
I don't know. I'm agnostic, you see, so I don't know. I guess you're saved if you, after you are dead, there's you come before some celestial court, and the court says you're going to heaven, and then you're saved.
This sounds like the opening to some kind of joke, like how do you know you were saved because the Baywatch girls are beside you or something. I don't know. This is ridiculous. I don't think there is such a thing as saved or lost or whatever preacher is currently madly foaming at the mouth about today. So I don't think there is a way to know that you are saved. And I don't think he knows that he is saved. I think he just claims it and, froths at the mouth onwards and rants his little spiel onwards.
Question from Command Cyborg. For Claire, doesn't the fact that Islamic leaders disagree about the interpretation of the Quran prove that it isn't the easiest to understand of all books that it claims to be?
There will be as many interpreters of a verse as the people who want to interpret it for their own interests, which is why you have courts with lawyers trying to interpret the law according to their client's interests and hoping to win the argument. So we will just have to work with the state of people being fallible and hope that we have good judges who are capable of having a wise interpretation of the rules. That's
or alternatively, we could go with maybe a system that's proved itself to be reliable and has checks and balances on power if that gets out of control. Just saying.
Question from Pat for Claire. How is a legal body, judiciary, and less prone to bias and corruption than a musical council? I should say ECU. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is a fundamentally flawed argument, particularly in a theocracy aristocratical.
I don't know what this person means by an ecumenical council. That's a Christian thing anyway, isn't it? An ecumenical council.
Yeah, but I think they mean like a similar thing, kind of thing, like a council of sort of jurists that would decide on the interpretation of a document or a religious text.
And yeah, if I could boil it down, it would be, how is this going to be less prone, your system less prone to bias and corruption?
It's really about the quality of the people in charge, which I think an infusion of this idea of submitting to truth, logic, and morality, i.e., the principles of the Quran, would actually help. Obviously, at the moment, many people in high places are corrupt and are not trusted by the people they govern, or presume to govern, or pretend to govern.
Question from Church of Entropy for Mark. In which country does, sponsored by Gatorade, does democracy function best?
I think the Scandinavian countries, like Iceland and Norway, Sweden, that democracy does function best, but I particularly think that sort of a social democracies are the best implementation of them. The metrics on them for education, health, education, sorry, I said that before, happiness metrics and things like that are just, they show that they work the best for the people and that the people get the most out of them. So that's the ones that I personally think are the most effective.
Woohoo!
If you want me to pick a specific country, I'm going to say Holland. There you go.
And so we have only just a few more sets of questions left. So if you want either of our two interlocutors to answer your questions, tag me now at Amy Newman. But it has been fun, ladies and gentlemen.
Let's see. I have a couple that they mounted. I didn't hear. Let's see.
I was gonna, but sure.
I have Amaretto, a question for Mark. Since it's pretty clear you don't think Claire's idea is sound, what improvements in government or social institutions would be better?
It depends on which country. I mean, there's problems across the board, but different parts. I think in Western over general stuff, I think that you could probably stop corporate and private interests from having as much influence upon legislative bodies through lobbying and things like that. The effect of wealth on the democratic process, I think, is a problem. So, you know, the only people that can, for instance, in America, that can run are people with tons of money, I think is a definite problem. And I'm not saying democracy is perfect in any way. There's definitely problems there, and especially with the American system, which is, you know, the electoral college and things like that. It's got definite improvements can be made, and that's the point. You know, we have these systems that are dynamic instead of Claire's static systems that can't be altered and are set in stone. Very dangerous, because when you realize that something's going wrong, you can't adapt them for the changing times. So, you know, that's why I think her system absolutely sucks.
Did you want to make a response to that, Claire?
I'm sorry, I wasn't listening. What was the question again? I'm so sorry.
Thanks, Claire. Cheers.
I was reading the chat. The chat. Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
The question was asking Mark what improvements we could make in Western society to social institutions and government and such.
Well, more rule of law and more people enforcing the right laws and more people discussing what the right laws should be.
Okay. I have Command
And-
Cyborg. I think this one's for you,
Yep.
Claire. It was, what does the West is declining even mean? What is your metric on that?
You broke up there. Sorry, James. What was that one? What
This
was the
from
metric?
Command Cyborg. It says, what does the West is declining even mean? What's the metric on that?
The decline of empires is signaled by, well, its own people rejecting its government, rebellion, terrorism, that sort of thing. Unwise wars, endless neocon wars that the American people reject. That kind of thing. The mandate of heaven being withdrawn. It applies to all countries, not just China, I think.
Okay.
Question from Church of Entropy. Why do you demean liberals, then claim the Quran is quite a liberal document?
I think in my view, I found it to be quite liberal compared to the Old Testament, and also a lot of the Hadith is about making harsher the quite liberal laws of the Quran. So all the bad things you hear about Muslims and Islam actually come from the Hadith, because they want to go back to Old Testament punishments like stoning adulterers, and that's certainly the Torah, but actually, if you read the Quran, you will find that it doesn't mention stoning at all.
Just whipping.
Yeah.
Question from Pat. Would Claire be willing to accept a Christian theocracy? Why or why not would the forced conversions of Muslims to Christianity be justified based on theological grounds?
Well, chapter 2, verse 256 of the Quran is the basis of the First Amendment, in my view, and it's the only scripture that actually talks about freedom of belief, and nothing of that exists in the New Testament. And and Christianity is about worshipping Jesus as God, which I think a lot of cultural Christians who challenged and rejected the divinity of Jesus found to their cost when they were burnt at the stake. So Christianity is totalitarian, and this is why the American Republic, the founding fathers of the American Republic, rejected it using the First Amendment, which is actually a verse from the Quran. So there's a certain irony in this. I know Americans and Westerners think that the First Amendment is a kind of liberal Western achievement, but I think it came from the Quran.
And moving right along, we have only think about 4 or 5 questions left, and they're all, I think, for
I've got a
Claire.
couple more.
So, okay. And if you have any
I don't know if you
for
caught it.
Mark, now is the time to also send them. But Leophilius, you think whipping people for having sex is going to prevent teen pregnancy over proper education and teaching responsible actions and use of protection?
Yes, because I don't think even adults know whether it's a good idea to have sex with another adult because of all the repercussions later when their relationship goes wrong. So teenagers would be even more likely to make mistakes, and if you just tell them you're going to be treated as a sex offender if you become an unmarried parent, they'll know where not to go. Rather than should I do it because it feels good and I think I love him, and all that sort of nonsense.
Sorry, that's not what Leo asked. He asked whether you think that whipping people will prevent teen pregnancies rather than education and condoms and that kind of.
Well, we already have sex education in schools, and it hasn't worked. Had it for decades, right?
What do you mean it hasn't worked? The pregnancy rates did drop due to sex education.
Well, it hasn't worked because teen pregnancy is has started.
Yeah, but
Rose
I
significantly
don't
after
think
the introduction of sex education.
I don't think whipping's going to be more effective than just sort of educating kids about sex and pregnancy and things like that.
Well,
I
we
think
haven't
that's the
tried it
point
yet,
where
have we, Mark? I mean, that's a very clear black and white rule. It's like, if you do it and you get caught and you become pregnant and have the baby, you're going to be treated as an unmarried parent. And this means being treated as a sex offender. Don't do it, kid.
Yeah, it's not really a good way to stop kids from having sex is the point that's being made. It doesn't really stop them from having sex and therefore getting pregnant as a consequence because they want to have sex.
Yeah, but because they know nothing much will happen, they think, well,
no, because they're hormonal hornbags that fuck at every opportunity.
Well, in that case, have single-sex schools.
I don't know if you remember being like 18 or something,
Of course I do.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. Okay, I went to a single-sex school, and thank goodness I did, because I just think it'd be, really distracting having to worry about relationships and boys. When you have a whole life to worry about that sort of thing, I think in your most vulnerable adolescent years, you should be protected from having to worry about having, silly relationships with other silly adolescents.
Thank you, Dr. Claire.
Question
Dr. Flower.
from Amaretto to Claire. So are you proposing a job training program for sadists then?
No, what job training program for sadists?
I think she means who would be inflicting these beatings that you're prescribing that would attract people who like to do that for fun.
Well, they found some people in RJ province, and I know Mark was saying he would show us some videos of these people. I mean, I don't mind if Mark shows them, because I've seen them, and I don't think it's something unendurable. It's just a light caning, in my view. Do you want to show them, Mark?
Well, we're in Q&A. I'd rather not, because I really would have to give a trigger warning, and they're not pleasant to watch at all.
Okay.
Question from Iron Charioteer. Do you think it's a good thing to get rid of things like rebellion and revolutions? And how will the divine help us, Devine?
We can't get rid of rebellion and revolutions. I mean, I know that a lot of tyrannical governments, censor and oppress in the hope of preventing rebellions and revolutions. But if you make enough people angry, they will rebel. Obviously, any government would like a magic pill to prevent these things, but one is not available.
I think he had Iron Charioteer had another question. I think it was in that same vein. It was, Claire, do you think it's good to live in a world where war and rebellion is inevitable?
But we already live in a world that is in which such things are inevitable. We still haven't found a solution to forever prevent it. And the only way to make sure people don't rebel against you is to govern them properly, so that most people in your country are reasonably happy. I don't think it's such a tall order.
So why try? Ridiculous.
Any response on that, Mark? Or that
yeah, so this idea that rebellions always happen, so let's just go with that. It's basically, well, why try? Why try and make a peaceful and understanding civilization if we've never succeeded before? The whole point is to make societies better, not perfect. And sort of going back in time to theocracies and these oppressive systems of government is not in any way going to make things better, and it won't prevent the rebellions. So it's just a ridiculous kind of, if we haven't succeeded at first, why try?
All right, we got 2 questions left, and then maybe anything clean up, and then we're going into our outros and closing statements. From Megatron, question for Claire: what makes her the expert on morality?
Well, morality is a system of rules designed to keep the group in existence and apart from others. And I think the best example is Judaism, from which Christianity and Islam are derived. And so I think the answer would be with the Abrahamic God, because he is the hypothetical supreme authority who has taken the trouble to make laws for us to follow. And we might as well follow them because well, we haven't got anything better other than our corrupt and incompetent politicians changing the laws to suit their corrupt and incompetent purposes.
Question from Pat. So same-sex schools are better? What about gay people?
Well, I guess that would suit gay people to have to be in same
Yeah,
sex
probably
schools.
not best not to get Claire started on gay people.
All right. Was there any other questions you saw, James?
Let's see.
Oh, I just
I
see one
have,
from Iron.
I have a couple from Iron right here. I'll read them both
Sure.
together because I think they're both in the same vein. It's for Claire. What would the penalty for apostasy be in your theocracy? And do you think God likes apostates? And followed up by, yep, no, actually, that's the same question. Yep, both from Iron Charioteer. Penalty for apostasy.
The penalty, there is no this life penalty for apostasy if you read the Quran. I know it's in the Hadith, but I, as a Quranist, I reject any Hadith that contradicts the Quran. And the only punishment that is mentioned in the Quran is that God will deal with you in the afterlife. But if you're an atheist, then obviously you don't believe, and that threat wouldn't bother you.
Okay, and then I have one more question from VII. Under her rules, what would the punishment be for adultery, Claire, and would you be willing to submit to it?
It would be 100 lashes. I know that there are some schools of Sharia that say we're going to adopt the stoning of the Torah. Obviously, under secular Quranism, I myself would be subject to all the laws. I wouldn't be above them. So yeah, if I were to have illegitimate offspring, or I would be punished at the rate of 100 lashes per illegitimate offspring. So that would be, yeah, that would apply to me too.
Okay, that's all I have, Amy.
Woohoo! All right. With that, I think we are going to move into our outros and our concluding statements. I hope you guys all had a fantastic time with tonight's debate, Theocracy.
We just had a question from Will come in, and I just saw him in the chat. You want to read that because he just keeps a little late to the party.
For Claire, how do you justify just as many killings under Sharia law for blasphemy or doctrine as ever was under Christian theocracy?
I'm afraid I don't understand the question. The Quran doesn't actually talk about blasphemy and doesn't prescribe a penalty for blasphemy or even idolatry. It does speak disapprovingly of idolatry, saying, why waste your time worshipping idols that can neither harm nor help you? But it doesn't prescribe a penalty. And also,
I think he said Sharia law. He said Sharia law, so I'm not sure. Firstly, I guess, do you advocate for Sharia law or just the Quran?
Well, okay, Sharia law I would interpret as law based on the Quran, but I know a lot of Muslim countries include the Hadith. But obviously secular Quranism is my own brand of interpretation, and I would reject anything in the Hadith that contradicts the Quran. And sorry, I actually.
So they're not following your version of Islamic.
And
They hate it. They hate it. I mean, they don't even like
Okay.
the idea of me,
Okay.
because I'm non-Muslim, interpreting that.
Yeah, so I guess the answer is that Claire doesn't actually believe in Sharia law. She believes in her own interpretation of the Quran, I guess, Will.
Mhm.
And
All right, thank you,
right,
guys. We're going to
that
move into
concludes
outros.
both of
Yep.
our Q&A section. I want to thank both of our interlocutors for coming to the debate tonight. And with that, we're going to hand it off to Claire for her 10-minute closing statement and tell us where people can find you.
Great, thank you, Amy, for having me on. My channel is called Claire Khaw, so you can find me under that. And I also have a secondary channel called the Hardcore Prawn. I hope I've managed to make my points reasonably clear. I am a political activist, and I am also a moral and political philosopher, and I do promote the ideology of nationalism, which I define as government in the national interest, and I'm a civic nationalist, so please don't think I'm some kind of crazy racist ethno-nationalist. Obviously, I live in the West as a minority, so it would be silly of me to be anything other than a civic nationalist. But I think a lot of people in the West are not happy with the way they are being governed, and I'm just suggesting a way out. I know they will find Islam and the idea of a theocracy hateful, but I think once upon a time the West did subscribe to many of its principles. I know over time it has moved away from that, and maybe suffering the consequences of so doing. And theocracy is what I suggest to social conservatives who I know are Christian, but I think you are only able to say that your religion is operating if you find the principles of your religion reflected in your legislation. And it is clear now that our laws are based on intersectional feminism rather than any kind of conservatism that supports marriage and family values. And unfortunately, since really the next generation can only be produced by sexual reproduction, I think it would help if they are the ideas of good parenting are being practiced. And I think it's impossible if most parents are not married parents. And I think that this is a cause of lowering standards of education and lowering standards of behavior, leading to chaos and criminality. And this is why I propose this kind of theocracy, which I don't think I would want. I mean, I promise not to interpret it harshly, and that's why I've had this kind of Islam-light interpretation of the Quran, which a lot of Muslims probably disagree with because they don't think it's sufficiently harsh and it's not like their kind of theocracy. But I don't see why the West can't at least consider these rules. And also I think because of the American Constitution, it does refer to God, that the founding fathers regard it as self-evident that man is created equal, and this implies a creator, and what other creator could the founding fathers have been referring to, rather other than the Abrahamic God. And also there is a White House Quran, and it belonged to Thomas Jefferson, who drafted the First Amendment. And I think he based it on chapter 2, verse 256 of the Quran, when he drafted the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom, which later became the First Amendment. And I think there is a lot of clues in the farewell speech of George Washington when he he gave advice to Americans about what to do and what not to do. And there are Quranic echoes in what he said in his farewell speech, which I know was not his own work completely, but he said things like, we must, with caution, indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion, and in a matter of foreign relations, he said, good. I can't remember, but anyway, it's something along the lines of morality and religion commands good conduct in matters fair conduct in matters dealing with foreign nations, and join good conduct and fairness towards foreign nations. So and this, in my view, has a Quranic echo in that the Quran talks about enjoining good and forbidding evil, and also has some verses on the conduct of warfare and foreign relations, and allows only defensive wars, which means that if everybody in the world followed this rule, then there would actually be fewer wars in the world if only defensive wars are allowed. And I think that's all I can think of to say at the moment. Oh yes, the mandate of heaven. I think it's a form of theocracy. You know, the idea of a hypothetical supreme authority that came from ancient China, but it seems to be, you know, in a way general. But I think a lot of people instinctively believe that there is, you know, something that is providential and may be benign if they follow the rules of good behavior and good and have a conscience about you know their conduct. And I think that's necessary for us to be to behave better towards each other and to enjoy the fruits of good government. And that's all I can think of to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Claire.
Make sure you got everything in there. So
absolutely. And all right, with that, we're going to hand it over to Mark for his closing remarks and tell everybody where they can find you.
Thank you so much, Amy. Yes, I'm sort of around. I'm sure Amy will list my link. I'm just starting on debates, so this is about my fourth. So thank you so much for indulging me, and to everybody. Now, what I want to go through on my closing up is just the dangerousness of this system, this theocratical system. We haven't heard in any way any way to separate powers or keep count on the executive, or in this case the judiciary, for some reason that would control this particular political structure. It's just basically we're hearing, well, it's a problem everywhere, so let's not try at all. And that's basically what's been iterated here. Some of the things proposed are just in stark violation of human rights according to the United Nations, that we sort of put together to move into a modern world. And nowhere has theocracy sort of made progress. You can point to the ways that democracy and the Enlightenment and sort of all of these ideas being put forward has progressed our world to the point where, you know, we're sitting on the internet discussing these things, and we're looking for ways to implement better ethics and better morality into our systems. It's very, very strange to me that we talk about how we're going to make these systems better and how we're going to create a better system and a more stable system, and you're pointing to some of the most unstable systems that we've ever seen, saying, hey, we should use these. I mean, to keep pointing to a mandate of heaven because China was an absolute nightmare place to live in. I mean, I'm sure it was great for the emperor and all of his cronies, but for the average person, like, for instance, the people that died building the Great Wall, or, you know, the peasants working in the fields, it was a terrible system, and eventually was overthrown by the Communist Party, who were sick of, the vast inequalities that were occurring. To point to that system and say, hey, that's a good thing to use, the mandate of heaven, is atrocious. It's absolutely atrocious. And some of these, talking about so some of these punishments and these whippings and these beatings and, all of the things permissible. And the strange thing is, here's the strangest part, is that Claire opened up saying that these passages are not subject to interpretation. And by the end of this debate, she's saying there are the same number of interpretations as people reading it. How can it get from there is no interpret, it can only be interpreted one way and that's a strength, to there is as many interpretations as there is people reading the thing? It's ridiculous. We all know and can all tell that people do interpret these things differently, which is why there is so many different forms in the world. And Claire's saying, hey, use mine. And that's okay, but what we see in these governments is a tendency towards fundamentalism. Okay, we might implement Islam light, but as time goes on and people want more power for themselves, the jurists or whatever governing body is in charge will start to allocate more power, and that power will allow them to get more power. But instead of having checks and balances on that, what does Claire advocate for? Rebellion, violent overthrow of governments, which is the worst way to provide a check on any government because it involves the death of so many people. I mean, I want to be nice to Claire, I do, but I must say, for my summation, this is one of the most dangerous and irresponsible ideas that you could possibly air, hoping that people would get on side of it. It's not well thought out. It's not compassionate to our fellow humans. It is a downright horrible system that should not be implemented in anywhere. And the Human Rights Commission is absolutely warranted to condemn in all of its nastiness and degradation to human life. I really hope that Claire will go away from today, imagine herself as one of these minorities or the oppressed people or the people being whipped, and just imagine that that's happening to her constantly for just being herself or expressing her own sexual identity. And I really hope that she goes away and has a really good think about how these people feel and why we can do so much better than these oppressive and regimented systems that tend towards fundamentalism and never ever provide any kind of meaningful progress in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you
Mark.
so very much, Mark. And all right, that is going to conclude this episode of Debate Me Brah.
Thanks everybody for
Theocracy?
coming on and watching, and thanks to Claire and Mark.
Exactly. Positive or negative. We hope you had a fantastic time with tonight's debate. In fact, sending love to all the people out there in the interwebs and
Our
in
mods
chat.
have been working hard
And
tonight.
our awesome
They've been working
mods.
overtime.
I also want to thank my co-host, James W., along with both of our debaters, Claire and Mark.
Thank you, Amy.
If you like
Thank you, Amy.
what you heard today,
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, James. Pleasure as always.
Thank you guys so much.
and
Check out their
both
channels.
of
Yeah,
their
more
links
content.
are in the description below. So go
I
check
think Iron
them out.
Charity is ready to convert.
And if you're feeling fancy, don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe. Why not? And all three. And if you'd like to support
Appreciate
the
it, Jordan.
show, feel free to check out our Patreon at patreon.com/Amy Newman. I'm Amy Newman, and we will see you all on the next episode of Skeptic Ball Z.
We might break the Patreon at some point. We'll work on that.
I think 2v2. That's the next, right?
Debate me, brah. Debate me.